By 1966, the Beatles were no longer the pop phenomenon who sang about holding hands. They had outgrown fame and were beginning to chase something else: freedom. In the quiet halls of Abbey Road studios, they were experimenting, arguing, and redefining what music could be. And in the middle of this creative storm, John Lennon brought in a song so strange, so unlike anything they had ever done, that he was convinced their trusted producer, George Martin, would hate it. That song was Tomorrow Never Knows.
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream.
It all started in early 1966, when John Lennon was in a state of transformation. He was reading The Psychedelic Experience, a book based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and experimenting with LSD. His mind was expanding, but so was his fear of losing himself. One night, he picked up a guitar and wrote a single droning line that captured what he felt. Turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. It was hypnotic, repetitive, almost ritualistic. There were no verses, no choruses, just one unbroken meditation. To Lennon, it wasn't a pop song, it was a mantra. When he brought it to the studio, he warned George Martin, "You're not going to like this one. It's not music, it's just one chord." He wasn't exaggerating. For years, George Martin had been the architect behind the Beatles' sound, shaping melodies, orchestrating strings, refining harmonies. But Tomorrow Never Knows was something else entirely. It wasn't written to be performed, it was built to be experienced. John wanted the song to sound like 1,000 monks chanting from a mountain. He didn't want guitars or drums in the traditional sense. He wanted sound itself, pure and unfiltered. Martin didn't reject the idea. Instead, he leaned in. "All right," he said calmly. "Let's see what we can make of it." That simple sentence changed the course of modern music. Together with engineer Jeff Emmerich, Martin began constructing a soundscape that had never been attempted before. They used tape loops, recordings of laughter, seagulls, sitars, orchestras, and even reversed guitars, spinning simultaneously across multiple machines. They ran John's voice through a Leslie speaker, a rotating device usually used for Hammond organs, to make it sound like it was echoing through infinity. The result was otherworldly. The recording sessions for Tomorrow Never Knows were chaotic, but not random. Each tape loop had to be perfectly timed, each sound carefully layered. McCartney, fascinated by avant-garde composers like Stockhausen, brought in several loops he'd made at home using scissors and tape. George Martin, ever the craftsman, orchestrated the madness. He treated it like conducting an orchestra made of machines. "We had 5 tape machines playing at once, each one looping a different sound," Martin recalled. "The engineers were holding pencils to control the reels. It was like flying without instruments. And yet, out of that chaos came order, a sound that didn't belong to any known genre. It wasn't rock, it wasn't pop, it wasn't even psychedelic yet. It was the sound of the future." When Lennon first heard the final mix, he couldn't believe it. He had expected resistance. He thought George Martin would dismiss the song as nonsense. Instead, Martin had elevated it. John later said, "I thought George would hate it. Instead, he made it sound like what I had in my head, only better." For perhaps the first time, producer and artist had met perfectly in the middle. Lennon's imagination and Martin's precision combining into something transcendent. It was a turning point in their relationship. George Martin stopped being just the man behind the console. He became a true collaborator in the Beatles' evolution. The rest of the band was equally stunned. Paul McCartney loved the experiment and dove deep into the technical side, bringing in more loops and textures. George Harrison, heavily influenced by Indian spirituality, recognized the song's droning quality as similar to a sitar raga. Ringo Starr, tasked with playing drums over what was essentially organized chaos, delivered one of the most inventive performances of his career. A steady, thunderous rhythm that grounded the track in hypnotic pulse. Together, they created something no one could have predicted, a song that didn't just sound new, it felt new. When Tomorrow Never Knows appeared as the closing track on Revolver in 1966, listeners didn't know what to make of it. Some thought it was terrifying. Others thought it was genius. It sounded like the end of one world and the beginning of another. It was both ancient and futuristic, a bridge between Eastern spirituality and Western technology. George Martin later said, "That was the moment the Beatles stopped being just a pop group. From then on, there were no rules." And he was right. Every psychedelic band that followed, from Pink Floyd to the Flaming Lips, owed something to that one track. In later interviews, Lennon often spoke about Tomorrow Never Knows as one of his proudest achievements. It wasn't commercial. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. "That's me on LSD trying to write about what it's like to let go," he said. "You couldn't dance to it, but you could float to it." He also never forgot George Martin's role in making it happen. Without George, it would have just been me banging a tambourine and shouting about dreams. What began as a song Lennon thought Martin would hate had in truth become the song that defined their collaboration. Tomorrow Never Knows remains one of the Beatles' most important works, the first true psychedelic recording in mainstream music, and a moment where art, technology, and imagination collided perfectly. George Martin didn't hate it. He embraced it. He understood that genius often hides behind chaos. And in that chaos, he found clarity, helping John Lennon transform his strangest idea into one of the most groundbreaking songs of the 20th century.